The chandeliers at the Bexley Penthouse Ballroom always reminded me of frozen stars, suspended in time above the sea of wealth that gathered beneath them. That night was no different, except that it would change everything. I smoothed down my black dress, the same one I'd worn to the last 20 galas I'd orchestrated. Black blended into shadows. Black meant invisible. And for 10 years, invisible is exactly what I'd been. Is everything ready, Evelyn? Thomas Bexley strode past me, barely making eye contact. His 6'3" frame was wrapped in a tuxedo that cost more than my monthly rent. Yes, Mr. Bexley. The Whitmore party is arranged precisely as requested. My voice was steady, professional, the voice of someone who'd spent a decade perfecting other people's moments. He nodded, absently, already scanning the room for the investors who could make or break his $300 million merger. Tonight was about Richard Whitmore, the venture capitalist whose reputation for brutal honesty was matched only by his perfect timing in backing unicorn startups. If he approved of Bexley's new tech platform, the deal would close by morning. Sienna did a beautiful job with the floral arrangements, Thomas murmured, gesturing to the cascading orchids that framed the entryway. The arrangements I'd spent 16 hours sourcing, designing, and personally placing. Sienna Blake, his 29-year-old special projects coordinator, smiled brilliantly from across the room. As always, her dress was the perfect shade of noticeable, emerald tonight, setting off her auburn hair. As always, she was positioned exactly where photographers would capture her overseeing the event. Yes, I replied. She has quite an eye. I watched her pose beside my centerpieces, her hand grazing them as if she'd just finished arranging them herself. A photographer appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Click. Another moment preserved with her in the frame, not me. The first guests began arriving at 7 p.m. Sharp. I moved like a ghost between them, straightening name cards, signaling servers, managing the invisible choreography that made these events appear effortless. By 7:45, the room hummed with power. CEOs from 5 continents, tech moguls, old money mixing with new, $100 billion of net worth, minimum, all sipping the 1982 Krug I'd spent months tracking down. At 8:10, Richard Whitmore arrived. I recognized him immediately from my research, silver-haired, athletic for his 60 years, with eyes that evaluated everything as if calculating its market value. Mr. Whitmore, I greeted him quietly. Your table is prepared with the adjustments you requested. He glanced at me, startled. And you are? Evelyn Walsh. I've arranged your seating away from the speakers as you prefer, with the specific mineral water you requested. Interest flickered across his face. You're the one who sent the detailed questionnaire about preferences. Yes, sir. Very thorough, rare these days. Before I could respond, Thomas appeared, clapping Whitmore on the shoulder. Richard, I see you've met Sienna, the brilliant mind behind tonight's experience. I turned to see Sienna had materialized beside us, hand extended toward Whitmore. Actually, I began. Such attention to detail, Thomas continued, guiding Whitmore away. She runs our entire hospitality division. We had no hospitality division. We had me. I watched them walk away, my carefully crafted words of correction dissolving on my tongue. This was the pattern. This was always the pattern. The evening progressed, according to my meticulously planned timeline. At 8:15, the chamber quartet began the Debussy piece that would signal dinner. At 8:17, Thomas tapped his glass for attention. Before we dine, he announced, I want to thank Sienna Blake for orchestrating tonight's experience. Applause rippled through the room as she gave a practiced, humble nod. And now please enjoy the culinary centerpiece of our evening. On cue, 20 servers in synchronization lifted silver domes from the plates. The moment I'd choreographed for weeks. Except something was wrong. Instead of the glistening, perfectly seared Maine lobster tails with the beurre blanc sauce I'd spent months perfecting with the chef, each plate revealed cold, gray-pink, uncooked lobster. No garnish, no sauce, nothing. The silence was sudden and absolute. I stood frozen, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I'd checked everything, every detail, Then I remembered. 3 days ago, Sienna had emailed the chef directly, removing me from the thread. Final execution changes approved, she'd written. Evelyn's been reassigned to another project. I hadn't been reassigned. I'd been erased. For 10 years, I'd created flawless experiences. For 10 years, I'd watched someone else take credit. For 10 years, I'd told myself it didn't matter. That perfect execution was its own reward. But watching Thomas Bexley's face drain of color as Richard Whitmore stared down at his raw, inedible lobster, something inside me shifted. 10 years of invisibility crystallized into a single, clear moment of decision. I stepped forward. The room was still deadly silent, everyone frozen in collective shock. Thomas was frantically signaling the servers. Sienna looked like she might faint. I cleared my throat. "My apologies," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "I was told I wasn't needed for final execution." Heads turned. Eyes found me, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time. I continued, looking directly at Richard Whitmore, that since I received no credit for the last 10 years of planning these events, I wasn't expected to complete this one either. The silence shattered into 1,000 tiny gasps. Thomas Bexley's face contorted between rage and panic. Sienna's perfectly glossed mouth opened and closed wordlessly. But Richard Whitmore did something unexpected. He laughed. A genuine, full-bodied laugh that seemed to release the tension in the room like air from a balloon. "Now that," he said, setting down his fork, "is the most honest moment I've experienced at a corporate dinner in 20 years. He stood, napkin placed precisely beside his plate, and walked directly to me. "You planned all this?" he asked, gesturing to the room, the flowers, the lighting, the carefully crafted seating chart. "Yes," I answered simply. "Everything except the raw lobster. That was an oversight." "No," he said thoughtfully. "I think that was the most deliberate thing that's happened tonight." He turned to face the room. "I believe we have an extraordinary opportunity here, ladies and gentlemen." My heart pounded against my ribs. "We get to start over," he continued. "With honesty this time." He glanced at Thomas, whose complexion had moved from white to crimson, and perhaps with the right person leading the way. I'd spent 10 years in shadows, arranging other people's light. But in that moment, as Richard Whitmore raised his glass in my direction, I felt something unfamiliar wash over me. Visibility. The first time I disappeared was deliberate. It was at the Morrison account pitch, 6 months after I'd joined Bexley Industries as an executive assistant. Thomas had been presenting to a room of skeptical banking executives, and his slides were in the wrong order. I'd slipped along the wall like a shadow, rearranged the presentation while he distracted them with small talk, and melted back to my position by the door. "Brilliant save," he'd said afterward. "You have a gift for invisible problem solving." It was the first genuine compliment he'd given me. So I built on it, perfected it, made invisibility my specialty. By year 2, I was anticipating problems before they materialized. I handled everything from crisis management to client preferences. I created systems for tracking every detail, which clients were lactose intolerant, which investors hated sitting with their backs to doors, which board members needed special accommodations but were too proud to ask directly. Thomas came to rely on me completely. "Evelyn knows," became his standard response when anyone asked him a logistical question. Yet somehow, this knowledge, this competence, never translated to recognition. The morning after the Whitmore dinner disaster, I sat in my small apartment in Astoria, watching sunrise paint the Manhattan skyline across the river. My phone had been buzzing since 5 a.m. 14 missed calls from Thomas, 23 from Sienna. I'd silenced them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder I hadn't looked at in years. Recognition, I'd labeled it. Inside were screenshots of emails, where clients had praised my work directly, before Thomas redirected credit elsewhere. Photos I'd asked servers to take of my event setups, before anyone else arrived to claim them. Evidence of a decade spent building someone else's legacy. My doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw Thomas Bexley himself, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Evelyn," he said when I opened the door. "We need to talk." I stepped aside to let him in. My 800-square-foot apartment could have fit in his master bathroom, but I felt no shame as he surveyed my IKEA furniture and framed botanical prints. "What happened last night was unacceptable," he began, pacing my small living room. "I agree," I said quietly. "You humiliated me in front of Richard Whitmore, in front of everyone." I sat down. At my kitchen table. "That wasn't my intention." "Then what exactly was your intention?" His voice rose. "To sabotage 10 years of relationship building over, what, hurt feelings? A need for attention?" The accusation hung in the air between us. I'd expected anger, but not this particular brand of dismissal. My intention, I said carefully, was to finish the job I was hired to do. But I was deliberately removed from the final execution emails. That's absurd. Sienna was just streamlining communication. By removing the person who designed the entire menu, who sourced the specific lobster from Maine, who spent 6 weeks coordinating with the chef on temperature and timing. Thomas waved his hand dismissively. Details. The point is, teams work together. Some people plan, others execute. Some work behind the scenes, others interface with clients. That's business. And some get credit while others don't. That's also business, apparently. His expression hardened. Is that what this is about? Credit? I didn't take you for someone so petty? The word hit like a slap. Petty. As if wanting recognition for a decade of excellence was some small-minded vanity. I believed the work mattered more than the credit, I said slowly. I still do. But when someone else is systematically taking credit for my work they had no hand in creating, that's not teamwork. That's theft. Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. Richard Whitmore wants to meet. With you. Alone. I couldn't hide my surprise. Why? Apparently, he was impressed by your honesty. The words seemed to physically pain him. He's requested a breakfast meeting. Today. And you're delivering this message personally because? Thomas sat down across from me, his demeanor shifting from angry to calculating. Because I'm offering you a deal. Meet with Whitmore. Smooth this over. Tell him it was all a miscommunication. If you do, there's a promotion in it for you. Director of Special. Events. Your own team. Double your current salary. I studied him for a moment. For 10 years, I'd seen past his charisma to the ruthless strategist beneath. I'd admired that quality, even as I'd been on the receiving end of it. But now I saw something else. Desperation. You need this merger, I said. It wasn't a question. The company needs this merger. Hundreds of jobs depend on it. Including Sienna's? His jaw tightened. She made a mistake. No, Thomas. You made a mistake. 10 years of them, actually. I stood up, suddenly aware that for the first time in our professional relationship, I had leverage. Real leverage. I'll meet with Richard Whitmore, I said. But I won't lie to him. Evelyn. And I quit. The words surprised me as much as him. They weren't planned. They simply emerged, fully formed and undeniable. Thomas stared at me. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. After everything I've done for you, the opportunities I've given you, I almost laughed. What opportunities exactly? The opportunity to work 18-hour days without recognition. The opportunity to watch someone else take credit for my ideas, my execution, my passion. You were compensated fairly. For an executive assistant, yes. Not for the invisible architect of your entire social and business reputation. He stood up, towering over me as he always had in the office. But something had changed. The height difference no longer felt like a power imbalance. You're making a mistake, he said coldly. I made you. I can break you just as easily. I walked to my door and opened it. No, Thomas. You didn't make me. You just failed to see what I was making of myself all along. After he left, I stood at my window, watching him climb into his waiting town car. My hands were shaking, but my mind was strangely calm. My phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Walsh, Richard Whitmore here. Breakfast at the Carlisle, 9 a.m. I believe we have much to discuss. I looked back at my open laptop, at the folder of forgotten recognition, at the years of invisible excellence. Yes, I typed back. I believe we do. The Carlisle Hotel stood like an elegant dowager on Madison Avenue, watching the city's rhythms with aristocratic detachment. I'd arranged countless business breakfasts here for Thomas, but never attended one myself. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. Ms. Walsh, Mr. Whitmore is waiting in the private dining room. I smoothed my navy dress, the most expensive piece in my wardrobe, reserved for special occasions, and followed him through the dining room. I felt oddly calm, despite the circumstances, perhaps because for the first time in 10 years, I was entering a room as myself, not as Thomas Bexley's shadow. Richard Whitmore stood when I entered. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that somehow communicated both wealth and restraint. Ms. Walsh, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Whitmore. Richard, please. He gestured to the seat across from him. I took the liberty of ordering coffee. A server appeared with a silver pot and poured for us both. The coffee was served in bone china cups so delicate they seemed to float on the white tablecloth. I imagine Thomas visited you this morning, Richard said, adding a precise amount of cream to his cup. He did, and made you an offer to smooth things over. I looked up, surprised by his directness. Yes. Richard's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Predictable. Thomas built his empire on predictable moves executed with excellent timing. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. The problem with predictability is that eventually everyone can see your next play before you make it. Is that why you're hesitant about the merger? I asked. His eyebrows rose slightly. You're well informed. I had to be. Thomas doesn't read briefing documents. He prefers verbal summaries. For 10 years, I've condensed 50-page reports into 2-minute briefings. Impressive. He set down his spoon. Yes, Bexley Industries has been innovative, but their execution has grown formulaic. I've been looking for evidence they can still surprise the market. And instead, you got a surprise lobster. He laughed. The same genuine laugh from the night before. Indeed, though what really surprised me wasn't the food. It was you. The server returned with breakfast menus, but Richard waved them away. We'll have the egg white omelets with avocado and grilled tomatoes. Wheat toast, no butter. He glanced at me. Unless you'd prefer something else? That's fine, I said, noting that he'd ordered exactly what I would have chosen. When the server departed, Richard leaned forward. In my position, Ms. Walsh, Evelyn. In my position, I see a lot of carefully crafted narratives. Companies tell stories about themselves, their vision, their culture, their execution. But there's always a gap between the story and the reality. He paused. Last night, I saw the gap in Thomas Bexley's narrative. The raw lobster. No. His gaze was steady. You. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. For years, he continued, I've attended Bexley's events. They're legendary for their precision, their attention to detail, the kind of events where nothing is left to chance. And all this time, I believed the face of that perfection was Sienna Blake. She plays her part well. But it was never her, was it? It was you. I looked down at my coffee. Does it matter? It matters. Enormously. Richard's voice took on an edge. Because I don't invest in facades. I invest in substance. And last night, when Thomas was panicking and Sienna was speechless, you were the only one who stepped forward with the truth. Our omelets arrived, steam rising from perfectly folded egg whites. Neither of us touched them. Tell me, Richard said, what would you do if you were running those events? Not as someone's assistant, but as the acknowledged creator? The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so long executing someone else's vision that I'd almost forgotten I had my own. I'd focus on connection, not just impression, I said slowly. Bexley events are spectacular, but they're designed to overwhelm, to create a sense of aspiration. I'd create experiences that foster genuine relationships. Go on. Wealth creates isolation. Most of these people have everything except authentic interaction. I'd design spaces and moments that break through that isolation, even briefly. Richard nodded thoughtfully. And how would you execute that differently? I found myself warming to the topic. Smaller settings within larger events, curated conversations, tactile experiences that require guests to be present, not just performing wealth for each other. I smiled slightly. And I'd make sure the lobster was cooked. I'd like to hire you, Richard said abruptly. I nearly choked on my coffee. Excuse me? Whitmore Ventures is opening a new headquarters in Manhattan. We'll need someone with your skills to create our internal and external experiences. Someone who understands that relationships, not spectacle, drive business. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity. Director of Strategic Relationships. You'd have full creative control, appropriate recognition, and twice whatever Thomas offered you this morning. My mind raced. It was a life-changing offer, delivered with the same matter-of-fact confidence with which Richard probably acquired companies. What about the merger? I asked. What about it? If I accept your offer, won't that complicate your dealings with Bexley Industries? Richard smiled faintly. The merger was never going to happen, Evelyn. Thomas's new platform is impressive, but not revolutionary. I came to that dinner to deliver the news personally. It's a courtesy I extend to people I respect. He took a sip of coffee. What I didn't expect was to find something more valuable than the technology I was turning down. Me, I said, the realization dawning. You. I stared out the window at Madison Avenue, watching New Yorkers hurry past, each living their own story of ambition and compromise. For 10 years, I'd poured my creativity and precision into building someone else's legend. Now, I was being offered the chance to step into the light. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course, though I should mention that I've already received 3 calls about you this morning. From various CEOs who attended last night's dinner. Apparently, your moment of honesty made quite an impression. You've suddenly become the most sought-after event planner in Manhattan. I felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside me. That's unexpected. Is it? Excellence always finds its audience eventually. Richard handed me his card. Take the weekend. Call me Monday. As I left the Carlisle, stepping into the bright September morning, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. The subject line read, Sienna Blake announced as new VP of Client Experience at Bexley Industries. I should have felt anger, or at least vindication. Instead, I felt something like freedom, as if the last thread tethering me to my old life had been neatly severed. By the time I reached the subway, I had 7 new LinkedIn messages from people who'd been at the dinner. By evening, that number would grow to 23. By Monday morning, to 48. The invisible woman had finally been seen. My apartment became command central for what I could only describe as the unexpected launch of my personal brand. After a decade of anonymity, I was suddenly everywhere. Mentioned in event industry newsletters, approached by former Bexley clients, invited to cocktail hours by people who'd never given me a second glance at Thomas's events. It's surreal, I told Maya, my oldest friend, as we sat on my tiny balcony Sunday evening. Yesterday I was nobody. Today I have 3 job offers and an invitation to speak at a hospitality conference. Maya swirled her wine thoughtfully. You were never nobody, Ev. You were just hidden. By choice, partly, I admitted. There was safety in invisibility. And now? I looked out at the city skyline, lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Now there's nowhere to hide. Monday morning, I called Richard Whitmore and accepted his offer. By Wednesday, I had a corner office in the Whitmore Ventures temporary headquarters, a team of 3, and a budget that made me dizzy every time I looked at the figures. The fall reception is in 6 weeks, Richard informed me. It needs to reflect our new direction. I trust you'll make it memorable. No pressure. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of craving recognition, I now had to prove I deserved it. Every decision carried the weight of visibility. There was no Thomas to blame if things went wrong, no Sienna to stand in front of the cameras while I fixed problems behind the scenes. Just me, exposed, accountable. The first 2 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and late nights. My team, Zoe, Malik, and Jordan, were talented but untested together. We were building the plane while flying it, creating new systems for everything from vendor relationships to client profiles. This needs to be different from Bexley's approach, I told them during our first strategy session. Less spectacle, more substance. Meaning? Zoe asked, pen poised over her notebook. Meaning we're not just creating pretty backgrounds for people to take photos against. We're designing experiences that foster genuine connection. It sounded good in theory. Executing it was another matter entirely. 3 weeks before the fall reception, disaster struck. Our venue, a renovated industrial space in Brooklyn with stunning Manhattan views, called to inform us that a structural issue had been discovered. They were shutting down for emergency repairs. We're screwed, Jordan said bluntly when I broke the news to the team. Every decent venue in the city is booked for that date. Not necessarily, I said, though my stomach was nodding. I may have an option. That afternoon, I found myself standing in the private garden of the Apsley, one of New York's most exclusive residential buildings. I'd once helped a board member secure an apartment here, and the favor had never been repaid. The garden was rarely used by residents and never rented out for events. But it was perfect, intimate, surrounded by ivy-covered walls, with a glass canopy that could be closed in case of rain. It's impossible, the building manager told me firmly. The board would never approve. What if the board didn't have to approve? I asked. What if this came as a personal request from one of your most prominent residents? 2 hours and 1 very uncomfortable phone call later, I had secured the space. The cost. A promise to the board member that I'd never reveal how the venue had been obtained. More visibility, less safety. The next challenge came in the form of Sienna Blake. I was reviewing floral proposals in my office when my assistant buzzed me. There's a Sienna Blake here to see you. No appointment. My heart rate doubled instantly. Send her in. She looked exactly as she always had. Perfectly put together. Not a hair out of place. But something about her demeanor had changed. The confident swagger was replaced by a tightly controlled tension. Evelyn, she said, taking the seat across from my desk. Without being invited. You're looking well. Thank you. Congratulations on your promotion. A tight smile. That's actually why I'm here. Oh? Thomas is telling everyone the promotion was planned for months, but we both know the truth. She leaned forward. He's terrified of you. I set down my pen. I find that hard to believe. 3 clients have left us since the Whitmore dinner, all. Mentioned your name specifically. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly are you telling people? Nothing they didn't see for themselves, Sienna. She stood abruptly and paced to the window. I didn't come here to fight. Then why did you come? When she turned back, I was surprised to see something like vulnerability in her expression. Because I need your help. My help, I repeated, flatly. The Sherman account. They're hosting their annual gala next month and they're challenging. I remember. Mrs. Sherman changes the entire concept 3 days before every event. Exactly. You always handled her brilliantly, and I don't have your notes. I almost laughed. For years, I'd maintained meticulous dossiers on every client, their preferences, their anxieties, their decision-making patterns. These were my personal files, not company property. I'd taken them when I left. Why would I help you? I asked quietly. Sienna's perfect composure cracked slightly. Because I'm drowning, Evelyn. The truth is, I was never doing what you did. I was just the face, the personality. Thomas handled the strategy, you handled the execution, and I smiled for photos. For the first time, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. Sienna had been playing a role assigned to her, just as I had. The difference was that her role had been visible, while mine had been essential. I can't give you my files, I said finally, but I can give you some advice. She sat back down, relief evident in her posture. Mrs. Sherman doesn't actually want to change everything at the last minute. She wants to feel heard. Call her 3 weeks before the event. Tell her you've been thinking about her feedback from last year. Ask if she'd like to incorporate elements of her summer home in Provence. She'll be so flattered you remembered that detail that she'll stop trying to control everything. Sienna stared at me. That's it? That's the secret? Relationships aren't about control, Sienna. They're about understanding what people really need, even when they don't know how to ask for it directly. After she left, I sat at my window, watching the city go about its business below. In my old life, I would have resented her visit, seen it as Thomas sending a spy. Now, I recognized it for what it was, an acknowledgement that what I'd built had value. Visibility brought its own kind of power. I was beginning to understand that now. The night of the Whitmore Ventures fall reception arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp, clear, with just enough chill to make the heated garden of the Apsley feel like a sanctuary. I'd been on site since dawn, overseeing final preparations, my nervous energy manifesting in endless adjustments to already perfect table settings. Evelyn, Malikow said gently, touching my arm as I rearranged a place card for the 3rd time. It's perfect. You're perfect. This is going to be amazing. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. The space was transformed beyond even my ambitious vision. A secret garden in the heart of Manhattan, with thousands of tiny lights woven through living ivy walls, creating the effect of stars brought down to earth. Long harvest tables replaced the expected rounds, encouraging actual conversation rather than shouted pleasantries across centerpieces. But what made me most proud was what guests couldn't see, the meticulous planning behind each detail. Every person had been thoughtfully placed next to someone they should meet, but probably hadn't. The menu featured dishes that required sharing, subtly forcing interaction. Even the background music had been composed specifically for the space, designed to fill silences without drowning conversation. At 6:30 p.m., Richard arrived for his pre-event walkthrough. Well, he said, taking in the transformation, this isn't what I expected. My stomach dropped. You don't like it. On the contrary. He turned to me, genuine surprise in his expression. I expected excellence, Evelyn. You've delivered something far beyond that. You've created... He gestured to the space, searching for words. Possibility. Relief flooded through me. That was exactly the intention. He nodded slowly. I see that now. At 7 p.m., the first guests arrived. Unlike Bexley events, where I would have been positioned in shadows near service entrances, I stood beside Richard at the entrance, greeting each arrival by name. "You know everyone," Richard murmured after I'd welcomed the 20th guest with a personal comment or question. "It's my job to know people," I replied. "No, your job was to know their food allergies and seating preferences. This is different." He was right. For years, I'd collected information about these same individuals, their children's names, their vacation spots, their philanthropic interests, but always as intelligence for Thomas to deploy. Now I was using that knowledge directly, creating genuine moments of connection. The evening flowed with an organic rhythm I'd rarely seen at corporate events. Instead of the usual pattern, drinks, awkward mingling, seated dinner with forced conversation, hasty departures, guests moved through, the space in natural ebbs and flows. The sharing plates encouraged people to serve each other. The strategic seating sparked animated discussions between former strangers. At one point, I found myself standing near the entrance, observing it all with a mixture of pride and disbelief. This was my vision, executed exactly as I'd imagined it. Quite a triumph. I turned to find Thomas Bexley standing beside me, champagne flute in hand. My breath caught in my throat. "Thomas, I didn't know you were invited. Richard and I go back decades. Business disagreements don't change that." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Lovely setting, very intimate. That was the intention. Quite different from our approach." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." We stood in uncomfortable silence, watching the room. Several people nodded in my direction, smiling in recognition. Thomas noticed. "You've made quite an impression in a short time." I had 10 years of preparation. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sienna mentioned she came to see you." "She did. Did you help her?" I considered lying, but there seemed little point. "I gave her some advice about Mrs. Sherman." He looked genuinely surprised. "Why?" "Because she asked." I met his gaze directly. "And because I understand what it's like to be thrown into the deep end without preparation." "You think that's what I did to her, isn't it?" He took a sip of champagne, his expression unreadable. "You misunderstand, Evelyn. I didn't promote Sienna to punish her. I promoted her because she was the only one who could plausibly fill your role." The admission hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us seemed willing to fully explore. "How is she doing?" I asked finally. "Struggling." His tone was matter of fact, neither critical nor sympathetic. "Turns out smiling for photos doesn't translate to orchestrating reality. She'll learn. Perhaps." He glanced around the room again. "Though I doubt she'll create anything like this." Coming from Thomas, it was the highest compliment he could offer. Part of me, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, glowed with vindication. "Ms. Walsh." Richard appeared at my elbow. "I see you've reconnected with Thomas." "Just catching up," Thomas said smoothly, congratulating Evelyn on her remarkable success. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed, she's transformed our entire approach to relationship building in just a few weeks." "Not surprising," Thomas replied. "She was always exceptional. That's why I kept her close for so long." I felt a flare of anger at his revisionist history, but before I could respond, a commotion near the center of the garden caught everyone's attention. One of the tech founders had just proposed to his partner in the small reflection pool I'd designed as the centerpiece of the space. The woman was laughing and crying simultaneously as guests applauded around them. "Was that planned?" Richard asked me quietly. "No," I whispered back, delighted. "But it's perfect." Thomas excused himself shortly after, disappearing into the night with a tight smile and a formal nod. I felt a curious mixture of emotions watching him go, lingering. Resentment, yes, but also a strange sense of closure. He no longer held power over my professional identity. As the evening drew to a close, Richard pulled me aside. "The board members are impressed," he said. "3 of them have specifically mentioned your work. That's gratifying to hear. It's more than that, Evelyn. They want to make your role permanent, Chief Experience Officer reporting directly to me." I stared at him. That's not even a position that exists in your company." "It does now." He handed me a folded piece of paper. "Here's what we're prepared to offer. Take your time reviewing it." I unfolded the paper and nearly gasped at the figure written there. It was more than triple my salary at Bexley. "This is extremely generous," I managed. "It's market value for exceptional talent." Richard's expression was serious. "You've proven in 6 weeks what most executives take years to demonstrate, that you understand the human element of business is ultimately what drives success." After the last guest departed, I sat alone in the garden, surrounded by the remnants of an evening that had exceeded even my ambitious expectations. The staff moved quietly around me, clearing dishes, folding linens, returning the space to its private status. I thought about the path that had brought me here, from invisible architect to visible creator, from arranging Thomas's world to building my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How did it go?" I smiled, trying to find words to capture the evening. Finally, I simply replied, "For the first time, I stood in the light of something I created, and I wasn't afraid of being seen." December arrived with Manhattan's peculiar brand of holiday magic, a mixture of genuine wonder and commercial excess that somehow cohered into something special. The city transformed itself with lights and greenery, as if trying to compensate for the early darkness that descended by mid-afternoon. I'd settled into my new role at Whitmore Ventures with surprising ease. My team had expanded to 7 people, each recruited not just for their skills, but for their understanding of the philosophy I was building. Experiences that fostered genuine human connection in a world increasingly mediated by technology and status. Our offices in the newly renovated Whitmore building overlooked Bryant Park, where the winter market and ice skating rink created a snow globe scene below my windows. I often found myself staring out at the skaters, watching their patterns of movement, gathering inspiration for the fluidity I wanted to create in our events. "Penny for your thoughts," said a voice from my doorway. I turned to see Jordan leaning against the frame, holding 2 coffee cups. At 32, he was the oldest member of my team, with a background in theatrical production that brought a unique perspective to our work. "Just gathering inspiration," I said, accepting the coffee he offered. "The way people move on ice. There's something there for the tech launch next month. Always working." He smiled, dropping into one of the chairs facing my desk. "Speaking of which, have you seen the industry newsletter today?" I shook my head. "You've been named Innovator of the Year by Event Horizon magazine. Apparently, you're revolutionizing corporate engagement through anthropological design principles." I nearly choked on my coffee. "They said what?" "It gets better." He pulled out his phone and read, "After a decade behind the scenes at Bexley Industries, Walsh has emerged as the visionary voice the industry didn't know it needed." "That's ridiculous," I muttered, though I couldn't help the pleased flush that warmed my cheeks. "Is it?" Jordan looked at me thoughtfully. "The Apsley event is still being talked about 3 months later. The Whitmore Tech Showcase has a wait list of 200 people, and Thomas Bexley himself called you a singular talent in that Financial Times interview last week." That particular quote had surprised me more than anyone. Thomas had been interviewed about Bexley's new direction post-merger failure, and he'd mentioned me unprompted, crediting me with building the foundation of Bexley's hospitality reputation. It was a public acknowledgement I'd never expected. "It's all happening very fast," I said. "Success usually does, once it starts." Jordan stood, heading for the door. "Oh, and Richard wants to see you when you have a moment. Something about the New Year's event. The New Year's celebration would be my biggest challenge yet, a combined party and product launch that would introduce Whitmore's new AI platform to the world." Richard had given me an unprecedented budget and complete creative control. The pressure to deliver something extraordinary was immense. I found him in the conference room, surrounded by architectural renderings. "Ah, Evelyn." He looked up, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Perfect timing. I wanted your thoughts on these." I sat down, examining the plans spread across the table. They showed a dramatic renovation of the Whitmore building's rooftop, currently an unused mechanical space, into what appeared to be an elaborate garden and event venue. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "The future," Richard said simply. "I'm converting the rooftop into a permanent event space. 17,000 square feet of possibility." I studied the renderings more carefully. The design was breathtaking. A glass-enclosed garden with retractable ceiling panels, living walls, and modular spaces that could be reconfigured for different events. "It's stunning," I said. "When would this be completed?" "June, if we start construction next month." He looked at me with that direct gaze that always made me feel he was seeing straight through to my thoughts. "I want you to oversee the project." "Me?" I blinked in surprise. "Richard, I'm an event planner, not an architect or project manager. You're a creator of experiences, Evelyn." "That's exactly what I need." He gestured to the plans. "Architects can design beautiful spaces, but they don't understand how people move through them, how energy flows, how environments shape interaction. You do." It was a stunning vote of confidence and a terrifying expansion of my responsibilities. What about my current role? You'll do both. I've approved additional headcount for your team to manage the day-to-day while you focus on the bigger vision. He smiled slightly. Unless you don't want the challenge? No, I paused, recognizing the familiar flutter of imposter syndrome rising in my chest. The old Evelyn would have hesitated, questioned whether she deserved such an opportunity. The new Evelyn took a deep breath and pushed past the doubt. I'd be honored. Thank you for the trust. Later that evening, I found myself doing something I'd avoided for months. I walked past the Bexley building on my way home. The massive glass tower had been my professional home for a decade, yet I'd never felt a true sense of belonging there. Now, looking up at the illuminated logo against the night sky, I felt strangely detached from the person I'd been within those walls. My phone buzzed with a notification from LinkedIn. Sienna Blake has viewed your profile. Curious, I opened the app and found a message waiting. Evelyn, I hope this isn't unwelcome. I wanted to thank you for your advice about Mrs. Sherman. It worked perfectly. I've been following your success from afar and wanted to offer sincere congratulations. You've built something remarkable in a short time. If you're open to it, I'd love to buy you coffee sometime. There's something I'd like to discuss. Sienna. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Part of me still associated Sienna with the pain and invisibility of my past. Another part recognized that she too had been playing a role in Thomas's carefully constructed world. After several minutes of consideration, I typed, coffee would be fine. How about Cafe Lalo next Tuesday at 4? Her response came almost immediately. Perfect. Thank you, Evelyn. I continued my walk home, snow beginning to fall in gentle flurries around me. So much had changed in 3 months. The woman who had stood in shadows for a decade was now being asked to design spaces that would shape how hundreds of people experience the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years making myself invisible, believing that my work should speak for itself. Now I understood that visibility wasn't just about ego or recognition. It was about impact. By stepping into the light, I'd gained the power to create the experiences I'd always envisioned, but never had the authority to execute. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Richard. Forgot to, mention. Thomas Bexley requested an invitation to the New Year's event. Thoughts? I stopped walking, watching snowflakes melt on the screen as I considered my response. 3 months ago, the idea of facing Thomas at my own event would have filled me with anxiety. Now I felt only a calm certainty. Of course, I typed back. Add him to the VIP list. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I realized that the weight I'd carried for so long, the weight of invisibility, of unacknowledged effort, had finally lifted. In its place was something lighter, but more substantial, the confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, only new worlds to create. I looked up at the snow falling through the glow of street lamps, transforming the concrete city into something magical and new. Like me, Manhattan knew how to reinvent itself season after season, never dwelling too long on what had been, always moving toward what could be. Tuesday afternoon found me at Cafe Lalo well before our scheduled meeting time. The charming Upper West Side cafe, with its wall of windows and European ambiance, had always been one of my secret refuges during my Bexley years, a place where I could sit anonymously and watch the world unfold around me. Today, however, anonymity eluded me. The hostess had recognized me immediately. Ms. Walsh, your usual table is ready, she said, leading me to the corner spot I'd favored for years. We've been seeing your name everywhere lately. The profile in New York Magazine was wonderful. I thanked her, slightly uncomfortable with being known. Fame, even in the relatively small circle of New York's event planning world, was an adjustment I hadn't fully made. Sienna arrived precisely at 4 p.m., looking both familiar and somehow diminished. Her clothing was still impeccable, a camel coat over a burgundy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But there was a new tension in her posture, a wariness in her eyes. Evelyn, she said, extending her hand formally. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Of course. I gestured to the chair across from me. Would you like something? The lavender latte here is extraordinary. Just green tea, thank you. After we ordered, an awkward silence settled between us. We had spent thousands of hours in proximity over the years, but had never really had a conversation that wasn't about work logistics or client preferences. You're looking well, she finally said. Success suits you. Thank you. I studied her face. noticing the subtle signs of strain around her eyes. How are things at Bexley? She gave a tight smile. Challenging. Thomas has been difficult since the merger fell through. More demanding than ever. I can imagine. No, she said, her voice taking on an edge. I don't think you can, because you were always competent. You always knew what to do. She wrapped her hands around her teacup. I was just the face, the personality. I never learned the systems you built. The raw honesty caught me off guard. In my narrative of those years, Sienna had been the calculating opportunist, happily taking credit for my work. I'd never considered that she might have been trapped in her own way. That's why I wanted to meet, she continued. I'm leaving Bexley. Oh, I blinked in surprise. Where are you going? That depends partly on you. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. I'm starting my own company, client-side event management, helping corporations navigate and maximize relationships with planners like you. She slid the folder across the table. Inside was a business plan for Blake Consulting, complete with projected financials and service offerings. It's a good concept, I said, genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of her proposal. There's definitely a market gap there. I have 3 potential clients interested, but I need... She hesitated, seemingly struggling with the words. I need credibility, endorsement from someone respected in the industry. And there it was, the real reason for this meeting. You want my blessing, I said quietly. I want your partnership. She leaned forward. Not as co-owners, as complementary businesses. You create extraordinary experiences. I help clients understand how to maximize them. We refer business to each other. I sat back, considering her proposal. 6 months ago, I would have dismissed it immediately, too wounded by years of watching her take credit for my work. But now, secure in my own success, I could see the business logic. Why should I trust you, Sienna? I asked directly. After everything that happened at Bexley? She didn't flinch from the question. Because I'm finally being honest. With you and with myself, I was never going to be you, Evelyn. I don't have your vision or your attention to detail. But I do understand people. I know how to make them feel important, how to translate between what they say they want and what they actually need. There was a sincerity in her voice I'd never heard before. Thomas is furious about this, by the way, she added. He thinks I'm betraying him. Are you? No more than he betrayed both of us by creating a system where we were set against each other instead of working together. I couldn't argue with that assessment. I'll think about it, I said finally. Send me your full proposal and we can talk again after the New Year's event. Relief flooded her features. That's all I'm asking for. A fair consideration. As she gathered her things to leave, she paused. I do owe you an apology, Evelyn. I knew what was happening all those years, how your work was being attributed to me. I told myself it was just business, just how things worked. I was wrong. The admission hung between us, unexpectedly powerful. Thank you for saying that, I replied softly. After she left, I remained at my table, watching the early winter darkness settle over the street outside. The encounter had unsettled me, forcing me to reconsider the neat narrative I'd constructed about my Bexley years. Perhaps Sienna hadn't been a villain, but another type of victim in Thomas's carefully orchestrated world, valued for her appearance and charm while being denied the opportunity to develop real skills. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Crisis with the New Year's venue. Calling emergency team meeting in 30 minutes. Reality reasserted itself. I paid the bill and stepped out into the crisp December air, the weight of recognition, both given and received, following me into the gathering night. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the New Year's event. The venue crisis, a sprinkler system malfunction that had flooded part of the space, was resolved with a redesign that actually improved the flow of the evening. My team worked around the clock, transforming the historic armory into a futuristic garden where Whitmore's new AI platform would be revealed. The concept was ambitious. Cultivating digital intelligence. We'd created an environment where living plants were intertwined with responsive technology. Guests would move through a space that reacted to their presence. Lighting, shifting, sounds changing, digital displays responding to conversation patterns. It was the physical embodiment of Whitmore's philosophy that technology should enhance human connection, not replace it. The night of December 31st arrived with perfect winter clarity. Cold but not bitter, the sky above Manhattan a deep star-filled indigo. I arrived at the armory at noon for final preparations. reviewing every detail with my now trademark intensity. "You need to get ready," Zoe reminded me at 6 p.m., as guests would begin arriving in 2 hours. "Your dress is in the green room, and the hair and makeup team is waiting." This was another change from my Bexley days. Then, I'd worn black and stayed in the background. Now, Richard insisted I be front and center as the face of Whitmore's experiential philosophy. The dress waiting for me was a deep emerald silk that caught the light like water. As the stylist arranged my hair in an elegant updo, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Confident, polished, visible. By 8 p.m., the Armory had filled with New York's elite, tech investors, media personalities, cultural influencers. Richard moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but always circled back to me, introducing me to key figures with evident pride. "Evelyn is the visionary behind everything you're experiencing tonight," he told Mira Nayak, the CEO of a major tech conglomerate. "She's revolutionizing how we think about digital human interaction." The praise still felt strange, though I was learning to accept it with grace rather than deflection. At 9:30 p.m., Thomas Bexley arrived. I watched him enter, noting how his eyes widened slightly as he took in the transformed space. When our gazes met across the room, he nodded in acknowledgement. "Should I run interference?" Jordan murmured at my elbow, having noticed the exchange. "No need," I replied calmly. "This is my house now." Thomas made his way to me slowly, stopping frequently to greet acquaintances. When he finally reached me, he extended his hand formally. "Impressive work, Evelyn," he said, his tone measured. "You've certainly found your spotlight." "Thank you, Thomas. I'm glad you could come." Richard was quite insistent. He glanced around the room. "I hear you're consulting on the new Whitmore rooftop development." "Overseeing it, actually." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. "Congratulations. That's a significant responsibility." "It is." An awkward silence fell between us. I realized with sudden clarity that Thomas had no script for this interaction, no way to position himself as the benefactor or mentor when faced with my independent success. "Sienna told me about her new venture," he said finally. "And your potential involvement." "We're discussing possibilities," I replied neutrally. "She lacks your skill set. She has her own skills. Different, but valuable." He studied me for a moment. "You've changed, Evelyn." "No, Thomas. I've simply become visible." Before he could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of Richard's presentation. I excused myself to take my position near the stage, leaving Thomas to find his own way through the crowd, a small but satisfying reversal of our decade-long dynamic. The product reveal was flawless. Richard's presentation, paired with the immersive environment we'd created, generated exactly the buzz Whitmore had hoped for. As midnight approached, the energy in the room built toward celebration. 10 seconds, someone called out, and the crowd joined in the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. As champagne corks popped and confetti drifted down from hidden dispensers, I found myself at the center of a circle of my team members, all raising glasses in my direction. "To Evelyn," Jordan said, his voice carrying above the noise, "who taught us that true excellence doesn't need to hide in shadows." The toast brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I looked around at these people who had become not just colleagues, but true collaborators, who saw me fully and valued what they saw. Across the room, I caught sight of Thomas watching the scene, an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, our eyes met again. Then he turned and quietly left the celebration. I felt no triumph in his departure, only a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, standing in the light of my own creation. Spring came early to Manhattan that year, with cherry blossoms exploding into pink clouds along Park Avenue by mid-March. The Whitmore rooftop project was ahead of schedule, thanks in part to the unexpectedly mild weather, and in larger part to the extraordinary team I'd assembled. I stood on the half-completed structure, watching as workers installed the massive glass panels that would form the retractable ceiling. Below me, the city stretched out in all directions, a landscape of possibilities I was only beginning to fully appreciate. "It's going to be spectacular," Richard said, joining me at the edge. "Even better than I imagined." "The southeast corner still concerns me," I admitted. "The afternoon sun will be too intense during summer months." "Always perfecting." He smiled. "That's why this project is succeeding." We'd fallen into an easy professional relationship over the past months. Richard valued my attention to detail, but pushed me to think beyond logistics to larger visions. Under his mentorship, I'd expanded my understanding of what was possible. The opening is confirmed for June 15th, I told him. We've already received RSVPs from most of the invited guests. Including Thomas Bexley? I hesitated. Yes, though I'm surprised he accepted. I'm not. Richard's gaze was thoughtful. Thomas recognizes talent, even when it's left him behind. The comment warmed me unexpectedly. Despite everything, part of me still craved validation from the man who had shaped the first decade of my career. How are the discussions with Sienna progressing? Richard asked, changing the subject. Well, actually, we've outlined a formal partnership agreement between her consulting firm and Whitmore Experiences. The division I now headed had been officially named and expanded 3 months earlier. She's already brought us 2 new clients. I admit I was skeptical when you first mentioned it. So was I acknowledged. But she has skills that complement ours, and there's something healing about transforming that relationship into something productive. Richard nodded. The best revenge is not just success, but creating a new paradigm entirely. We left the rooftop soon after, returning to the bustling offices below. My team now occupied the entire 32nd floor, 15 people dedicated to creating experiences that fostered genuine human connection in an increasingly digital world. As I walked through the open workspace, I took pride in the environment I'd built. Not just the physical space, with its collaborative zones and quiet reflection areas, but the culture. Unlike Bexley Industries, where credit flowed upward to Thomas and recognition was a scarce resource, Whitmore Experiences operated on radical transparency. Every contribution was acknowledged. Every voice was heard. Later that afternoon, I met Sienna for our now regular strategy session at a small tea shop in Chelsea. Her consultancy, Blake Strategic, had grown to a team of 4, specializing in helping corporate clients maximize their event investments. The Johnson Group is ready to sign with Whitmore for their fall leadership retreat, she informed me, sliding a brief across the table. They need an experience that transforms their executive team from competitors to collaborators. Sounds perfect for us, I said, scanning the document. Jordan will be the ideal lead for this one. I thought so too. She sipped her tea. By the way, I saw Thomas yesterday. I looked up. Oh? He asked about you. What did you tell him? The truth, that you've built something remarkable. She set down her cup. He's struggling, Evelyn. The company's reputation has suffered since you left. 3 more executives resigned last month. I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Satisfaction, certainly, but also an unexpected pang of sympathy. He'll rebuild. Thomas always does. Maybe. She looked thoughtful. But I think he's finally realized what he lost when he lost you. Not just your skills, but your integrity. The observation stayed with me throughout the day and into the evening as I worked late, finalizing designs for the rooftop opening. Around 9 p.m., my assistant buzzed me. There's a delivery for you in reception. Curious, I made my way to the front desk, where a large white box sat waiting. Inside was a single perfect lobster tail, cooked this time, on a bed of ice. A note accompanied it, handwritten on heavy cardstock. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but acknowledgement is a start. The work was always yours. I was wrong not to recognize that. Thomas. I stood staring at the note, emotions tangling in my chest. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But from Thomas Bexley, it was unprecedented. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the rooftop progress. Can't tonight, I replied. Working late, but free tomorrow? Perfect. Your place at 7? I'll bring the wine. I returned to my office, the note from Thomas tucked into my pocket. As I settled back at my desk, my gaze fell on a framed photo that had become something of a talisman, a candid shot from the Whitmore fall reception, capturing me in profile as I surveyed the transformed garden of the Apsley. I looked confident, purposeful, fully present in a moment of creation. It was the first professional photo in which I'd ever appeared. Now my image was featured regularly in industry publications and Whitmore marketing materials. The transition from invisible to visible had been both more challenging and more rewarding than I could have imagined. June arrived with relentless heat, turning Manhattan into a shimmering mirage of concrete and glass. The rooftop project was complete, a spectacular elevated garden enclosed in smart glass that adjusted its transparency based on sun position and temperature. Living walls erupted with carefully curated plants, creating zones of privacy within the open design. Water features provided both aesthetic beauty and natural cooling. On the evening of June 15th, I stood at the entrance to this created paradise, greeting the city's elite as they arrived for the grand opening. My team moved through the space with quiet confidence, ensuring every detail was perfect. At 8:30 p.m., Richard I called for attention. The crowd of 300 gathered around the central reflecting pool, champagne flutes in hand. Tonight marks not just the opening of a space, but the continuation of a philosophy, he began. For decades, Whitmore Ventures has believed that technology should enhance human connection, not replace it. This extraordinary environment embodies that belief. He gestured around the rooftop. But the true visionary behind what you're experiencing isn't me. It's Evelyn Walsh. He beckoned me forward, and I joined him at the edge of the pool, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes focused on me. When Evelyn joined Whitmore 18 months ago, she brought with her not just exceptional skill, but a profound understanding of what makes experiences meaningful. This rooftop, this living, breathing space for connection, is her creation. And I'm honored to announce that, effective immediately, Evelyn is being appointed to the Whitmore Ventures Board of Directors, the youngest member in our company's history. The announcement caught me completely by surprise. I hadn't known Richard was considering me for a board position. The crowd's applause washed over me as I struggled to compose my thoughts. "Thank you," I said when the applause subsided. "This space represents everything I believe about how environments shape human interaction, but it wouldn't exist without the extraordinary team who brought my vision to life." I acknowledged my team members by name, watching their faces light up with recognition. Each of them contributed ideas that made this better than anything I could have created alone. As the formal presentation ended and the party resumed, I found myself approached by a steady stream of well-wishers and admirers. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of invisibility, I now couldn't escape being seen. Near midnight, as the celebration showed no signs of winding down, I slipped away to a quiet corner of the rooftop. A small meditation garden, hidden behind a living wall of jasmine, offered respite from the energy of the main space. Seeking escape from your own success? I turned to find Thomas standing at the entrance to the secluded area. "Just a moment of quiet," I replied. He nodded, understanding in his expression. "May I join you?" I gestured to the bench beside me. He sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. "Congratulations on the board appointment," he said. "Well deserved." "Thank you. And thank you for your note, and the lobster." A small smile touched his lips. "I thought you might appreciate the symbolism." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled by the wall of greenery surrounding us. "I failed you, Evelyn," he said finally. "Not just professionally, but as a mentor." The admission, so direct and unqualified, startled me. "You had extraordinary gifts," he continued. "I should have nurtured them, helped you develop them openly. Instead, I exploited them while keeping you in shadows." "Why?" I asked softly. "I've never understood why." He considered the question carefully. "Initially, it was convenience. You were so competent, so willing to work behind the scenes. Then it became systemic. The company narrative had been established with Sienna as the face of our hospitality division. Changing that would have required acknowledging the deception. And your ego couldn't accommodate that," I supplied. "No," he agreed. "It couldn't." He turned to look at me directly. "But watching what you've built here, how you lead your team, how you share credit." Openly, I realized my approach wasn't just wrong ethically, it was wrong strategically. You've created something far more powerful through transparency than I ever did through careful control. Coming from Thomas, this was an extraordinary concession. "I'm rebuilding Bexley Industries," he said after another moment of silence. "New leadership team, new philosophy. I'd like your input, if you're willing to give it. As a consultant, you mean? As whatever you're comfortable with. I value your perspective, Evelyn. I should have told you that years ago." I considered his request, feeling the weight of our shared history and the potential paths forward. "I can't be directly involved," I said finally. "My commitment is to Whitmore now, but I'm open to conversations, to sharing what I've learned." Relief crossed his features. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." As he stood to leave, he hesitated. "The night of the raw lobster. Did you plan that?" Or was it truly an oversight? I smiled slightly. What do you think? I think, he said carefully, that it was the most perfectly executed statement I've ever witnessed. After he rejoined the party, I remained in the quiet garden, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. From invisible architect to visible creator, from arranging someone else's world to building my own. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Vogue wants to feature the rooftop in their September issue, with you as the design visionary. Available for a call tomorrow? I smiled at the message, another milestone in my unexpected public journey. As I stood to rejoin the celebration, I caught sight of my reflection in a panel of decorative mirror. The woman looking back at me was composed, confident, and undeniably present, not hiding in shadows, not diminished by others' expectations, but fully occupying her rightful space. The invisible, finally, made gloriously visible. 10 years of excellence had not been wasted after all. They had been preparation, building skills, resilience, and vision that would eventually find their proper light. The story I'd lived wasn't about erasure, but about emergence. Not about revenge, but about reclamation. I moved back toward the heart of the gathering, where my team celebrated our shared achievement. As I stepped into the warm glow of recognition, earned, acknowledged, and generously shared, I carried with me the most important lesson of my journey. Visibility isn't vanity. Credit isn't arrogance. And sometimes claiming your place at the table is the most revolutionary act of all.